You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Takeshi Tuesdays. Today is the Season 2 premiere of Takeshi Tuesdays, and we're going to be talking about Takeshi's style, or more specifically, a specific aspect of Takeshi's style. Before we dive into that, I'm going to go ahead and give a brief rundown of how Season 2 is going to play out. So, Season 2 I have planned so far. I have 11 movie reviews planned, including the remaining 9 of his movies that he has directed that I've seen. I've seen every movie he has directed now, and I do own every movie he has directed now, so we're going to run through all of those reviews. We're also going to review a couple of movies that he starred in but didn't direct, and then there's a few other bonus things we're going to throw in here and there. But anyway, to the topic of today's video, as I said, we're going to be diving into a specific aspect of his filmmaking style, because there's very common themes throughout his movies. This video will be spoiler-ridden, even though my reviews themselves typically are not. A lot of the spoilers are going to be from movies I have already reviewed during Season 1, however there will be quite a few from things that I have yet to review and will be reviewed later in this season. So if you don't wish for those to be spoiled, then I don't recommend watching this video until you've seen those movies. That said, if spoilers aren't a big deal to you, go ahead and stick around. But anyway, today what we'll be talking about is Takeshi's use of tragedy. Or more specifically, just kind of the hopelessness and futility that he instills into his fictional universes. I'm going to use a couple of examples. I'll start by using Fireworks. Fireworks is probably one of the most depressing movies I've ever seen. It's actually my favorite movie now. I hadn't decided that the first time I saw it, but it has become my favorite movie, as well as obviously my favorite Takeshi movie. But Fireworks is just a massive downer throughout the entire film. For instance, the main premise of it is a retired police officer who retired because he blames himself for getting one of his partners killed on the force. Then his other partner gets crippled, and that other partner has this whole side story where his wife leaves him and takes the kids, and he's just painting to try and feel less useless and kill time. Meanwhile, while that's going on, the main character's wife has leukemia, so he borrowed money from the Yakuza in order to pay her medical bills. But despite that, she's still dying. And basically the doctor tells him, there's nothing we can do. All you can do is take her home and spend as much time with her as you have left. So that's kind of the premise of Fireworks, is he's just spending the remaining hours he can with his wife, while his partner is going on and just painting so that he feels slightly less useless. And his partner's paintings, they start out pretty, abstract and stuff like that, but eventually he does paint this big picture that says suicide, and that actually ties into the ending of the movie. The way the movie ends is not well for the main character. The main character he robs a bank to pay back the Yakuza, so it gives you some false hope to think, okay, well, he paid them off, everything's gonna be fine. But despite that, turns out that they want interest because he took a while to pay them back, and they're thugs. So they're still following him around. They do eventually catch up to him, but he kills them. Now, because he's killed them, he's wanted for murder. And so, since he's an ex-cop, two of his former best friends are going down and hunting him down because they have to bring him in. The movie ends with a climactic scene on the beach, where the main character, played by Takeshi, is sitting with his wife on the beach, and the cops show up. The way this plays out is, you see him load 2 bullets into his gun. Then he goes to approach his 2 old friends, and then he says, "Can you give me a moment with her?" And then, because they're his old friends, they're like, "Yeah, of course." And so, he takes his gun with the 2 bullets and goes and sits next to his wife. While he's sitting next to her, she turns to him and says, "Thank you for everything." It then pans out to where you can't see them anymore, and it's just kind of viewing the ocean. You hear 2 gunshot sounds, and then the credits roll. Now, obviously, the implication is that he killed his wife and then himself. There is some interpretation where I guess you could maybe infer that he killed his 2 cop friends, but I find that way less likely, just because that doesn't seem like characteristic with the character throughout the movie. And on top of that, it wouldn't really solve anything long-term. Now, granted, he's not going for long-term, he was just spending as much time as he had left with her, but essentially I think he's much more likely to have taken out his wife and himself, since she didn't have much longer anyway, and in a way, neither did he. Now, other than Fireworks, most of his Yakuza movies end with his character dying, and often having many of the other characters die. For instance, Sonatine, there's only one survivor from his group, and it's not him. he actually kills himself in Sonatine because all of his crew were killed. But he got revenge and then killed himself. Then in Brother, everyone dies except for Denny, the character played by Omar Epps, the black guy. He's the only one who lives. All of the Japanese members of his crew in Brother die because he helps Omar Epps' character, Denny, to escape and gives him enough money that he'll be able to start a new life. So in a way, that one does kind of end happily, but it still ends with with Takeshi's character dying and all of the rest of the crew dying, with only Denny surviving. Even in his more lighthearted movies, there's always still a lingering despair in them. For instance, in Getting Any, the main character still dies at the end. Now, while this is played up for laughs, it does still happen. Then also in the movie A Scene at the Sea, which I'll be reviewing next week, the main character actually dies towards the end of the film, even though most of the movie is just about him surfing and is somewhat about his budding romance with his girlfriend. So even in some of his lesser sad movies, characters die. I mean, in Kid's Return, which we'll get to later on in the season as well, the two characters don't die, but they rise to the top only to fall real hard back to rock bottom and fail miserably. Now, why do I praise this so much? Well, this is really one of the main reasons I watch Takeshi's movies. There's sort of a beauty in the despair he injects into it and the hopelessness that he fills the world with. You feel sympathetic for the characters and you want them to succeed, and the fact that they almost never do makes it all the more impactful. Sometimes they give you false hope, like Dolls. In Dolls, everyone dies. There's not a single character that survives. And they keep making you think that they're going to have happy endings, but they never do. When he made Dolls, Takeshi actually made a statement about it. And that statement goes as follows, and I quote, "The reason why modern Japanese and Westerners loathe the notion of death so much is beyond me. There really is no reason to loathe death. How you perceive this film can considerably differ depending on the position where you stand." So to me, that tells me that Takeshi doesn't look at death as a negative. He looks at it as just another part of life. And that's why he's not afraid to portray it in such a fashion in his films. And in a way that adds a sense of realism to him. He doesn't give you the sugar-coated happily ever after endings. He doesn't give you the hero wins, gets the girl, and then moves on and lives a happy life. No, he gives you everyone tries their hardest, and a lot of the times they fail. Every now and then you'll get one of his movies where the characters don't die and don't suffer horribly. For instance, in Kikujiro, although there is sadness in the movie, it ultimately has a somewhat happy ending with Kikujiro and Masao bonding. And even in his most depressing of movies, there are happy moments sprinkled throughout. I think part of why I like Fireworks so much is even with how much of a downer it is, it still has happy moments, and it still has moments where he spends time with his wife and making the most of his time. Essentially, the whole point of Fireworks, I think, is to make the most of the time you have. But overall, there's a certain beauty in the way he implements death into his films. I wouldn't have it any other way. Every single one of his movies is a masterpiece, in my opinion, with maybe the exception of Glory to the Filmmaker. I honestly don't really like that one that much, but the rest of them, I would say, are masterpieces. I think that another thing that definitely adds to it is the atmosphere created, specifically in the films when he has the soundtrack done by Joe Hisaishi. Now, Joe Hisaishi did the music for 7 of Takeshi's 18 movies. Them ranging from A Scene at the Sea all the way until Dolls. But after that, they never collaborated again. Only time will tell if that ever changes. But those soundtracks add to the feel of it, because Joe Hisaishi is a fantastic composer. And without those soundtracks, I definitely think the impact wouldn't be as much. I will say this, because of the soundtrack, the themes, and the way it's written, Fireworks is one of the only movies that I can actually be brought to tears just by thinking about the movie, or just by listening to the song on the soundtrack called Thank You for Everything, which, as I mentioned before, is the song used in the final scene where his wife says those same words to him. And the song itself actually contains the gunshot sound effects in the music on the track. It just goes to show just how far music and atmosphere can add to that. A final thing I want to end with, Takeshi has always seen beauty in death, and that's why he chose to use a skewered Napoleon fish for the cover of Sonatine, because Napoleon fish used to be very prominent in Japanese harbors, but it's been slowly dying out, and now they're rare and few and far between. And with the cover on Sonatine showing a beautiful fish like a Napoleon fish on a spear to contrast with the beauty and the death, basically emphasizes the whole point of every one of Takeshi's movies, in my opinion. To find beauty in tragedy, to find solace in despair. I can't think of any other director that has ever made me feel that way. And that is why Takeshi is my favorite director, and that is why his films work. This has been Fugitive Red Eye, and I'll see you next time for Takeshi Tuesdays.
Mr. Hat gets a nose job.